Old Mr. Stevens was a man with a story to tell. Unfortunately for all the neighbors within a 50-mile radius, he had exactly one tale to tell, a hunting experience that had happened to him decades ago. It was an incident in which he had the starring role, and his fondness for relating it grew as the years went by. The narrative expanded, of course, his part getting more and more heroic with every recitation. Well, Mr. Stevens had just two problems. He was running out of audiences, for one thing. And not every conversation went naturally in the direction of his hunting adventure. He would do all that he could, of course, to steer the topic in the right direction. Most of the time, one way or the other, with a few broad jumps of logic, he would finally manage to wrestle the train of thought into the general vicinity of his hunting tale. In fact, so I've heard, he finally discovered a way to virtually guarantee that his story would come up. If at a party or a gathering, the conversation didn't proceed toward his target quickly enough, he would wait until attention was diverted away from himself. Then quickly he would clap his hands together as sharply as he could, exclaiming, "What was that, a gun?" After a moment's pause, he would add, "Speaking of guns," and the story would begin. Well, several trusted friends told him that if he ever told the story again, they'd lock him in the nearest closet. But it's such a wonderful story. You know, in a much more noble way, the Apostle Paul had the same mindset. He was stuck in a conversion rut and was the first to admit it. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2. "For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified." Now keep in mind that Paul was a preacher and a teacher, a storyteller. So we're talking about a man who'd chosen to have just one theme in his public speaking. 52 Sabbaths a year. He tells them it's going to be Calvary, Jesus, the gospel. Maybe you remember an old Vince Lombardi line that the Green Bay Packers fiery football coach would scream at his players, "Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing." Paul beautifully adapts that slogan. The cross of Christ isn't everything, it's the only thing. His own personal encounter with Jesus Christ had convinced the apostle that he had found the solution to the deepest heart cry of every man, every woman, every child. The risen Savior, Jesus Christ, that was it. That was everything. So he said to them, "This is really all I have to say to you. I don't come here with any other message." Remember that the culture of Corinth placed a high value on philosophy. People loved to debate and play with words and bounce ideas off each other. Was Paul confronting pleasure-loving, cocktail-sipping, late-night debating Corinthian society with yet another philosophy, another set of ideas? The answer is an emphatic no. Christianity wasn't simply another outline of lifestyle suggestions, another code of ethics. It was a person, a divine person named Jesus Christ, a God in human form who had been executed and now lives again. I like how the writer C.S. Lewis sums up what Paul is talking about here in chapter 2. In Beyond Personality, the Christian idea of God, he wisely observes that if Christianity only means one more bit of good advice, then Christianity is of no importance. There's been no lack of good advice for the last 4,000 years. A bit more makes no difference. Well, that was what was so hard for the argument lovers of Corinth to comprehend. Here was another guy with an axe to grind. They sighed, stifling a yawn, Just one more philosopher with a few concepts to try out during amateur night at the coffee club. It was a tremendous challenge to break through that hardened, crusted over wall of ideas and show such men and women the person, the living Savior. The same scenario exists today, especially on the TV and radio. The waves buzz with a whole lot of ideas. I listen to a lot of them, and so do you. Talk radio is a hot cacophony of concepts, of arguments and philosophies, of point and counterpoint. People driving on the freeways flip from one station to the other, from political right to left, back again, gurus and counselors and therapists and people with videos to sell weight at every frequency. And then there's the Christian message, programs like The Voice of Prophecy or It Is Written, Faith for Today, and others. Is this just one more philosophy, just one more way to find serenity within yourself, another way to name it and claim it and maybe make a lot of money? Here's where I have to grab onto the hand of Paul and say what he said. We're just going to preach Christ crucified, not a philosophy, not a set of ideas about self-improvement, but a man who came to earth, died, rose from the grave, and now lives again and involves himself in our lives. That's what the Christian faith has to offer. It offers us Jesus. So, if Paul was going to pick just one thing to preach about, I guess he picked the right one. Theologian C.S.C. Williams once wrote that the world has had enough teachers. It needs a redeemer. And another point to consider, if philosophies are vulnerable things. You ever thought about that? Your model, your construct, lasts only until somebody else comes along with a better one. You piece together a set of principles to live by, but time proves them ineffective. Or somebody smarter than you shows up at the Debating Society's monthly meeting and simply wipes you out. They come along and shift your paradigm for you. Again, Geoffrey B. Wilson once wrote, "A faith that depends upon clever reasoning may be demolished by a more acute argument, but the faith which is produced by the power of God, let me add, built on Jesus, can never be overthrown." Say it often. Theories are interesting, but Jesus saves. Now, Christian faith does involve some philosophy and advice for daily living and has its own set of truisms. The well-known Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 to 7 is a long 107-verse discourse on how to live, packed with suggestions on ways to order your life, follow the golden rule, turn the other cheek, be faithful to your wives. Blessed are the peacemakers. It's tragically possible for even the Christian church to get tangled up in the precepts and miss the person who preaches them. Even the wisdom of the Sermon on the Mount is just one more collection of Corinthian concepts if we move away from Jesus Christ, its author. So we start from the premise, knowing nothing except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. As we've already noted, appears foolish to others. Hence the question, are only dumb people Christians? Those on the outside, looking in, surely think so. My friend David had a late night bedtime conversation once with his young daughter, Carly, who was about 6 at the time. "Are you going to heaven?" he asked her. In between goodnight kisses, she grinned. "Sure." As in, of course, dumb question, Dad. How come, he asked. How come you get to go? David was really gearing up for a sermonette on grace and sanctification and end-time events. Her 6-year-old answer was simple. Maybe she'd been reading 1 Corinthians 2 in kindergarten that week. "'Cause I love Jesus," she said with drowsy confidence. "Everybody who loves him gets to go."